All right, today we're going to pick back up where we leave last chapter with two things that are obvious. One is the abolitionist movement is in high charge. It's in full speed. It is spreading throughout the country. The effects of just the momentum that has been created, whether it was through the Underground Railroad, whether it was through some of our early abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, the country is definitely taking at least more of an outspoken voice against the institution of slavery. Second thing is, we know for sure that as we begin to move into the West and we add new territory, will it be free or will it be slave? Ultimately determining representation in Congress. The same argument we've had since 1787. What do we do about slavery, in other words? Today I want to start us out with what is called the Compromise of 1850. We find ourselves in a pivotal time in history. The leaders of this nation following the War of 1812 are in their latter days, and they're doing their best to keep the Union they know together. The strong voice out of the South, of course, is John C. Calhoun. He has built this Southern defense that slavery can follow the flag, and it is the South's natural right to take their property anywhere. Henry Clay has been our great compromiser who lives in Kentucky, which is a slave state, and he actually has slaves himself, but he's trying his best to keep the Union together. It's all about the Union. And out of Massachusetts, we have Daniel Webster. Webster has long felt the pressure from his Massachusetts brethren, and of course the Pennsylvania Quaker crew, to hear the voice of the abolitionist. And of course he's part of the Whig Party, there's a faction of the Whig Party who is strong advocates for the abolition of slavery. So together they try to figure out how to reach one last compromise before we turn guns on ourselves and have a civil war. They're able to iron out what is known as the Compromise of 1850. I'm going to talk about it and then I'll give you a definition. One component of the Compromise of 1850 deals with the state of California. Obviously, the state of California is ready to apply for statehood, and it comes into the Union as a free state. The second objective here is to ask the question, what do we do about the slave trade in Washington, D.C.? Washington, D.C., of course, is not in the South, and it's not in the North. It's kind of in the middle, if we want to say, but nobody owns it. It's the nation's capital. But there is a slave jail, and there is a slave auction block. And sometimes when ambassadors from other countries come, they want to say, hey, take me down to the slave jail because we ain't got nothing like that in our country. So it's really an eyesore for, let's just say, the North. The South says there's nothing wrong with it. We have them everywhere, in other words. Well, let's get rid of that. So the first two components here is we're really, basically, the North is getting two good parts. The third part would be to push the boundary of Texas back so that the South could possibly make more slave states. So the South gets one incentive, I guess we could say. The next one would be to allow popular sovereignty in the territory taken from Mexico. Now, we all know that this is desert, so cotton and slavery probably isn't going to exist there, But the government kind of just wants to wash its hands of determining free and slave. Put it on the people, in other words. Let the people make a choice. We call that popular sovereignty. Of course, that kind of favors the North in this situation because it's a desert in this region of the country. More likely, in other words, to become free territory. The last one is called the Fugitive Slave Law. And this fugitive slave law is exactly what the South has been asking for. They have millions of dollars worth of property, runaway slaves that are in the North. And that Underground Railroad has been their ticket out of the South. What they'd like to do is go retrieve their property. When the fugitive slave law was added, the North and the South are able to compromise. But as I said, this will only postpone the war for 10 years. But the war is imminent. It's coming. Here's your definition. Let's 1, 2, and 3 this. We're not going to write the whole compromise. We're going to write the top three main compromises. Number 1, please put California comes in as a free state. Number 1, California comes in as a free state. Number two, popular sovereignty would be used in the West. Popular sovereignty would be used in the West. And our third one is going to be the fugitive slave law. The fugitive slave law. My next term is called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. If we moved 4 years ahead, we will find ourselves under the same circumstance we found ourselves before. We can make laws, or let's say Congress can legislate laws, but the executive branch has to enforce the laws. And consequently, some of our executive presidents have not been as forceful as a George Washington riding in on his white horse to put down a rebellion. They have kind of like mediated and decided to sidestep and not handle the slavery issue, in other words. That would be Franklin Pierce, and as we will see, James Buchanan as well. So as of right now, what we see is slave owners in the red moving into Kansas. We have non-slave owners moving into Kansas, and the rivalry of what Kansas would become breaks out into a war. It breaks out into a conflict between anti-slavery and pro-slavery groups. Stephen A. Douglas is a Northern Democrat. He also has a vision of the West being a business market, not completely consumed by plantations. He is a Democrat, and he currently is part of the Democrat Party, which includes Southern Democrats also. But he says, let's just do this in Kansas and Nebraska. Why don't we just open it up to popular sovereignty? Let the people decide. However, in order to do that, we got to get rid of something that has kind of been sacred, at least in the North it's been sacred, and that is the Missouri Compromise line. You see, Kansas is above the 3630 line. So if we allow popular sovereignty here, then really the Missouri Compromise doesn't mean anything anymore. So here's your definition. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, it repealed the Missouri Compromise line and used popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska. It repealed the Missouri Compromise line and used popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska. Needless to say, it erupts into fighting, and we're first introduced to our radical abolitionist John Brown, who declared a holy war against slave owners, even bringing out tomahawks and sabers and hatchets to execute, literally, his plan. My next term is called the Republican Party. We kind of see the Republican Party emerge in the 1852 elections, and we don't see until 1856 an actual presidential contender, but they're just not a household name, and they don't quite have all the remnants of the parties that are in America at the time on board. There's a few political parties in the 1850s. We have what is known as the Know Nothing American Party. They're an anti-foreign party. They don't want immigrants coming to the country, which is happening because of the market revolution. We have what is called the Democrat Party, and they're kind of splintering between the West issue. Southern Democrats want slavery in the West, but Northern Democrats want business. So there's a fine line of how long that party can stay together. Of course, we have the Whig Party we talked about earlier with Henry Clay, and they're kind of split too, because you kind of have your Southern Whigs that are holding on to versions of protecting or keeping slavery, and then you have Northern Whigs who are abolitionists. So a very drastic type of difference in that political party, for example. And then, of course, you have this new Republican Party. And really what they're doing is trying to find a good presidential candidate. They have their eyes on this one-time congressman in Illinois who's running for a Senate seat to test out their operation. His name is Abraham Lincoln. He runs as a Republican candidate for the Senate in the state of Illinois, and what he does is he basically creates a platform for the Republican Party. The platform is skillfully worded in regards to the Republican Party wants to stop the spread of slavery to the West. By saying they want to stop the spread of slavery to the West, Northern abolitionists think that's a good idea. Northern Democrats think that's a good idea. Maybe some Southern business Whigs think that's a good idea who aren't slave owners, but they're in the business realm. And then, of course, you might even get some of the American Party to drift over into the Republican Party. So, coming out with a good message in which you can capitalize on various groups of Americans to win a contest or an election sounds like a good idea. Unfortunately for Abraham Lincoln in 1858, although they called him the great debater, he does not win the Senate seat. But it gives him time to get ready for a presidential election that we know is coming in 1860. Here's your definition. The Republican Party began in the 1850s. It began in the 1850s with the platform, stop the spread of slavery to the West. Stop the spread of slavery to the West.